Zadig, Chapter 14 The Basilisk. Arriving in a beautiful meadow, he there saw several women, who were searching for something with great application. He took the liberty to approach one of them, and to ask if he might have the honor to assist them in the search. "Take care that thou dost not," replied the Syrian. "What we are searching for can be touched only by women." "Strange," said Zadig. "May I presume to ask thee what it is that women only are permitted to touch?" "It is a basilisk," said she. "A basilisk, madam, and for what purpose, pray, dost thou seek for a basilisk?" "It is for our lord and master Ogle, whose cattle thou shayest on the bank of that river at the end of the meadow. We are his most humble slaves. The lord Ogle is sick. His physician hath ordered him to eat a basilisk, stewed in rose water. And as it is a very rare animal, and can only be taken by women, the lord Ogle hath promised to choose for his well-beloved wife the woman that shall bring him a basilisk. Let me go on in my search. For thou shayest what I shall lose if I am prevented by my companions." Zadig left her and the other Assyrians to search for the basilisk, and continued to walk in the meadow. When coming to the brink of a small rivulet, he found another lady lying on the grass, and who was not searching for anything. Her person worried to be majestic, but her face was covered with a veil. She was inclined toward the rivulet, and profound sighs proceeded from her mouth. In her hand she held a small rod with which she was tracing characters on the fine sand that lay between the turf and the brook. Zadig had the curiosity to examine what this woman was writing. He drew near, he saw the letter Z, then an A. He was astonished. Then appeared a D. He started. But never was surprise equal to his when he saw the last letters of his name. He stood for some time immovable. At last, breaking silence with a faltering voice, "O generous lady! Pardon a stranger, an unfortunate man, for presuming to ask thee by what surprising adventure I here find the name of Zadig traced out by thy divine hand." At this voice and these words, the lady lifted up the veil with a trembling hand, looked at Zadig, sent forth a cry of tenderness, surprise and joy, and sinking under the various emotions which at once assaulted her soul, fell speechless into his arms. It was Astarte herself. It was the Queen of Babylon. It was she whom Zadig adored, and whom he had reproached himself for adoring. It was she whose misfortunes he had so deeply lamented, and for whose fate he had been so anxiously concerned. He was for a moment deprived of the use of his senses, when he had fixed his eyes on those of Astarte, which now began to open again with a languor mixed with confusion and tenderness. "O ye immortal powers!" cried he, "who preside over the fates of weak mortals, do ye indeed restore Astarte to me? At what a time, in what a place, and in what a condition do I again behold her?" He fell on his knees before Astarte and laid his face in the dust at her feet. The Queen of Babylon raised him up, and made him sit by her side on the brink of the rivulet. She frequently wiped her eyes, from which the tears continued to flow afresh. She 20 times resumed her discourse, which her sighs as often interrupted. She asked by what strange accident they were brought together, and suddenly prevented his answers by other questions. She waved the account of her own misfortunes, and desired to be informed of those of Zadig. At last, both of them having a little composed the tumult of their souls, Zadig acquainted her in a few words by what adventure he was brought into that meadow. "But, O unhappy and respectable queen! By what means do I find thee in this lonely place, clothed in the habit of a slave, and accompanied by other female slaves, who are searching for a basilisk, which, by order of the physician, is to be stewed in rose water? While they are searching for the basilisk," said the fair Astarte, "I will inform thee of all I have suffered, for which heaven has sufficiently recompensed me by restoring thee to my sight. Thou knowest that the king, my husband, was vexed to see thee the most amiable of mankind. And that for this reason he one night resolved to strangle thee and poison me. Thou knowest how heaven permitted my little mute to inform me of the orders of his sublime majesty. Hardly had the faithful Cador advised thee to depart, in obedience to my command, when he ventured to enter my apartment at midnight by a secret passage. He carried me off and conducted me to the temple of Aromases, where the mage his brother shut me up in that huge statue whose base reaches to the foundation of the temple and whose top rises to the summit of the dome. I was there buried in a manner, but was saved by the mage, and supplied with all the necessaries of life. At break of day his majesty's apothecary entered my chamber with a potion composed of a mixture of henbane, opium, hemlock, black hellebore, and aconite. and another officer went to thine with a bowstring of blue silk. Neither of us was to be found. Kada, the better to deceive the king, pretended to come and accuse us both. He said that thou hadst taken the road to the Indies, and I that to Memphis, on which the king's guards were immediately dispatched in pursuit of us both. The couriers who pursued me did not know me. I had hardly ever shown my face to any but thee, and to thee only in the presence and by the order of my husband. They conducted themselves in the pursuit by the description that had been given them of my person. On the frontiers of Egypt they met with a woman of the same stature with me, and possessed perhaps of greater charms. She was weeping and wandering. They made no doubt but that this woman was the queen of Babylon, and accordingly brought her to Moabdar. Their mistake at first threw the king into a violent passion, but having viewed this woman more attentively, he found her extremely handsome and was comforted. She was called Misif. I have since been informed that this name in the Egyptian language signifies the capricious fair one. She was so in reality. But she had as much cunning as caprice. She pleased Moabdar and gained such an ascendancy over him as to make him choose her for his wife. Her character then began to appear in its true colors. She gave herself up, without scruple, to all the freaks of a wanton imagination. She would have obliged the chief of the Magi, who was old and gouty, to dance before her, and on his refusal, she persecuted him with the most unrelenting cruelty. She ordered her master of the horse to make her a pie of sweetmeats. In vain did he represent that he was not a pastry cook, he was obliged to make it, and lost his place, because it was baked a little too hard. The post of master of the horse she gave to her dwarf, and that of chancellor to her page. In this manner did she govern Babylon. Everybody regretted the loss of me. The king, who till the moment of his resolving to poison me and strangle thee had been a tolerably good kind of man, seemed now to have drowned all his virtues in his immoderate fondness for this capricious fair one. He came to the temple on the great day of the feast held in honor of the sacred fire. I saw him implore the gods in behalf of Misif, at the feet of the statue in which I was enclosed. I raised my voice, I cried out, the gods reject the prayers of a king who is now become a tyrant, and who attempted to murder a reasonable wife, in order to marry a woman remarkable for nothing but her folly and extravagance. At these words Moabdar was confounded and his head became disordered. The oracle I had pronounced, and the tyranny of Misif, conspired to deprive him of his judgment, and in a few days his reason entirely forsook him. Moabdar's madness, which seemed to be the judgment of heaven, was the signal to a revolt. The people rose and ran to arms, and Babylon, which had been so long immersed in idleness and effeminacy, became the theatre of a bloody civil war. I was taken from the heart of my statue and placed at the head of a party. Kada flew to Memphis to bring thee back to Babylon. The prince of Hyrcania, informed of these fatal events, returned with his army and made a third party in Chaldea. He attacked the king, who fled before him with his capricious Egyptian. Moabdar died pierced with wounds. I myself had the misfortune to be taken by a party of Hyrcanians, who conducted me to the prince's tent, at the very moment that Misif was brought before him. Thou wilt doubtless be pleased to hear that the prince thought me beautiful, but thou wilt be sorry to be informed that he designed me for his seraglio. He told me, with a blunt and resolute air, that as soon as he had finished a military expedition, which he was just going to undertake, he would come to me. Judge how great must have been my grief. My ties with Moabdar were already dissolved. I might have been the wife of Zadig, and I was fallen into the hands of a barbarian. I answered him with all the pride which my high rank and noble sentiment could inspire. I had always heard it affirmed that heaven stamped on persons of my condition a mark of grandeur, which, with a single word or glance, could reduce to the lowliness of the most profound respect those rash and forward persons who presume to deviate from the rules of politeness. I spoke like a queen, but was treated like a maidservant. The Hyrcanian, without even deigning to speak to me, told his black eunuch that I was impertinent, but that he thought me handsome. He ordered him to take care of me, and to put me under the regimen of favorites, that so my complexion being improved, I might be the more worthy of his favors when he should be at leisure to honor me with them. I told him that rather than submit to his desires I would put an end to my life. He replied, with a smile, that women, he believed, were not so bloodthirsty, and that he was accustomed to such violent expressions, and then left me with the air of a man who had just put another parrot into his aviary. What a state for the first queen of the universe, and, what is more, for a heart devoted to Zadig. At these words Zadig threw himself at her feet and bathed them with his tears. Astarte raised him with great tenderness and thus continued her story. I now saw myself in the power of a barbarian and rival to the foolish woman with whom I was confined. She gave me an account of her adventures in Egypt. From the description she gave me of your person, from the time, from the dromedary on which you were mounted, and from every other circumstance, I inferred that Zadig was the man who had fought for her. I doubted not but that you were at Memphis, and, therefore, resolved to repair thither. Beautiful Misif, said I, thou art more handsome than I, and will please the prince of Hyrcania much better. Assist me in contriving the means of my escape. Thou wilt then reign alone. Thou wilt at once make me happy and rid thyself of a rival. Misif concerted with me the means of my flight, and I departed secretly with a female Egyptian slave. As I approached the frontiers of Arabia, a famous robber, named Arbogad, seized me and sold me to some merchants, who brought me to this castle, where Lord Ogle resides. He bought me without knowing who I was. He is a voluptuary, ambitious of nothing but good living, and thinks that God sent him into the world for no other purpose than to sit at table. He is so extremely corpulent that he is always in danger of suffocation. His physician, who has but little credit with him when he has a good digestion, governs him with a despotic sway when he has eaten too much. He has persuaded him that a basilisk stewed in rose water will effect a complete cure. The Lord Ogle hath promised his hand to the female slave that brings him a basilisk. Thou sayest that I leave them to vie with each other in meriting this honor, and never was I less desirous of finding the basilisk than since heaven hath restored thee to my sight. This account was succeeded by a long conversation between Astarte and Zadig, consisting of everything that their long-suppressed sentiments, their great sufferings, and their mutual love could inspire in hearts the most noble and tender. And the genii who preside over love carried their words to the sphere of Venus. The woman returned to Ogle without having found the basilisk. Zadig was introduced to this mighty lord and spoke to him in the following terms. May immortal health descend from heaven to bless all thy days. I am a physician. At the first report of thy indisposition I flew to thy castle and have now brought thee a basilisk stewed in rose water. Not that I pretend to marry thee. All I ask is the liberty of a Babylonian slave, who hath been in thy possession for a few days. And, if I should not be so happy as to cure thee, magnificent Lord Ogle, I consent to remain a slave in her place. The proposal was accepted. Astarte set out for Babylon with Zadig's servant, promising, immediately upon her arrival, to send a courier to inform him of all that had happened. Their parting was as tender as their meeting. The moment of meeting and that of parting are the two greatest epochs of life, as saith the great book of Zend. Zadig loved the queen with as much ardor as he professed, and the queen loved him more than she thought proper to acknowledge. Meanwhile Zadig spoke thus to Ogle. My lord, my basilisk is not to be eaten. All its virtues must enter through thy pores. I have enclosed it in a little ball, blown up and covered with a fine skin. Thou must strike this ball with all thy might, and I must strike it back for a considerable time, and by observing this regimen for a few days thou wilt see the effects of my art. The first day Ogle was out of breath and thought he should have died with fatigue. The second he was less fatigued, slept better. In 8 days he recovered all the strength, all the health, all the agility and cheerfulness of his most agreeable years. Thou hast played at ball, and thou hast been temperate, said Zadig. Know that there is no such thing in nature as a basilisk. That temperance and exercise are the two great preservatives of health. And that the art of reconciling intemperance and health is as chimerical as the philosopher's stone, judicial astrology, or the theology of the Magi. Ogle's first physician, observing how dangerous this man might prove to the medical art, formed a design, in conjunction with the apothecary, to send Zadig to search for a basilisk in the other world. Thus, having suffered such a long train of calamities on account of his good actions, he was now upon the point of losing his life for curing a gluttonous lord. He was invited to an excellent dinner and was to have been poisoned in the second course, but, during the first, he happily received a courier from the fair Astarte. When one is beloved by a beautiful woman, says the great Zoroaster, he hath always the good fortune to extricate himself out of every kind of difficulty and danger.